Good morning, and welcome to the webinar being done jointly with Armor and Strateq Health, Sanitizing Cybersecurity in the Wake of COVID-19. I'm Joe Tuma, your host, and today I'm joined by Mike Annand, the Director of Customer Compliance from Armor. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, Joe. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for coming along and helping me with this. I appreciate it. Well, here on our agenda today, we are going to talk about some of the cybersecurity challenges that healthcare organizations are facing during the global pandemic like COVID-19. We'll address cloud security issues that directly impact hospitals, healthcare organizations, as well as telemedicine, and other recommendations on how to prepare your healthcare company against both accidental and fake risks and cyber threats. All right, in 2018, there were about 7 million telemedicine visits in the US, but we've seen an explosion in the last 6 months. Virtual care visits are expected to reach about 1 billion visits in 2020, with about 900 million of those visits coming from COVID-related symptoms. It's hard to imagine the healthcare industry being tested in other ways than they have been over the last few months, but they are in cybersecurity. We've seen a dramatic increase in cyber attacks against healthcare organizations and even research institutes that are trying to develop a vaccine.
So it's unfortunate because it looks like, the hackers or the people that mean to do harm to your business have really stepped up their efforts during the pandemic, and that's unfortunate. You see all the slogans around, we're in this together. Well, they're not in it with us. So it's important that security remains a priority right now.
I think criminals are a lot like viruses. They look for opportunity to do what they do. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that's becoming a bigger issue. And because of that, there's been warnings from the US, CISA group, and even the European group for the NSC. There's been a dramatic increase in COVID-related phishing schemes that use very effective World Health Organization logos or the John Hopkins map. In addition, there are over 130,000 domains that have been registered with some COVID-19 or coronavirus variation. And we know thousands of those have already been identified as malicious. While the attacks may have slowed down in some areas during the pandemic, perhaps because victims aren't able to pay, they have picked back up, and we know that with so many businesses having distributed workforce, it has created a broader attack surface.
Absolutely. I have 3 main pillars for security that I like to hold to. The first one is to minimize your attack surface as much as possible. The second one is to identify, respond, and remediate security incidents as quick as possible. And then the third one is just to make sure that your systems are patched as soon as possible. Given that first one, the attack surface, and the current situation with COVID-19 and the distributed workforce, that really creates a much larger attack surface. And for those of people in the audience that may not understand what I mean by attack surface, if you think of your business as a building and you have one door at the front where people come in and out, that's easy. That's your attack surface, that one door where people come in and out. But businesses aren't like that. They have side entrances, they have back doors, which makes security much more difficult. And so your attack surface is really any place where someone can come in or go out. And so think of security that way. With a distributed workforce, when we're all working from home, you've got many more places where someone that means to do your business harm can attack, whether it's the worker at home, whether it's the connection to the office, or still the regular attack surface that you had through your business before the workforce became distributed.
Which makes sense because everything has changed so quickly. And speaking of changing quickly, let's talk for a moment just specifically about telehealth. Televisits have increased dramatically over such a short period of time. Amwell, a core platform that many US hospitals use for telemedicine, there's an estimated to be almost 1 billion visits this year. And I wonder what some of the other impacts are to both clients and prospects.
Well, certainly the technology has always been there to have a distributed workforce. I think companies were probably a little bit hesitant to allow people to work remotely more because of the security impacts. It certainly does reduce some costs. And if you think historically about how doctor visits used to happen, it used to be where the doctor would go and visit you for a house call. And then it became more something where people go into the office or the clinic. And now it looks like we're kind of using technology to go back to the house call, which is nice. It certainly does save costs, but it's important when we rush to implement things like we had to with COVID-19 that we circle back and we examine the security of it, just to make sure that the security is sound and that the solution is something that's going to align with our security profile. So I'll give you an example. When I used to work in the energy sector, we had an issue where everybody at the company had to dial in from home over a weekend to resolve an issue. And we did not have the capacity to do that. It actually browned out the network, which, it's just so much capacity trying to access one firewall or entrance point that it just bogged it down. And we realized, hey, you know what? We need to probably look at our infrastructure and make adjustments to that. So that's might be something that, people are dealing with a distributed workforce.
Yeah, and I think you also have the size of the company can probably affect that as well, because larger companies can afford to add more layers of security, where some of these smaller startups that have come around to address whether it be telehealth or other COVID related things are smaller companies that don't have the budget to keep people safe.
Absolutely.
So previously, telehealth been reserved to rural areas or for general visits, and even occasionally some specialty visits. But now it appears to be for everyone from a dermatologist to any other practice that is going to now have to operate that way.
Absolutely. And like I said, historically, we've gone from the house call to the clinic visit back to the house call using technology. And I hope this becomes, a new standard, because it certainly can, it can make managing those appointments a little easier. You don't have to deal with the egress and ingress of patients coming in, whether, think about somebody very sick coming into a clinic. They can now, connect from home. There are going to be some limits to what we can do. Obviously, we're not going to be able to take blood or take temperature. They have to have their own thermometers at home and their own blood pressure machines. But certainly, this is something that I think is probably here to stay.
Well, and personally, for me, I think a good example of why it needs to be is having a father who visits the VA hospital that's about an hour away, and VA hospitals are, they're being overrun right now with a lot of different things. And for me to be able to keep him at home versus going to a hospital where there are more chances of him getting COVID, making it as easy as possible for him to speak with his doctor when he needs to is important for me as a caregiver as well. So I agree. I hope that we get more back to the virtual home visits, like that we did in person 50, 60 years ago.
Yep, that would be fantastic.
Yep. Well, certainly during these chaotic times, cyber criminals are more motivated, and they are targeting the vulnerabilities that come with working remotely. We have found that they are targeting RDP access, Microsoft 365, as well as the plethora of video conferencing platforms available.
And what you're going to see if you follow hackers is that they like to capitalize on fear. And there certainly is a lot of misinformation out there today. What is legitimate, what's coming from the CDC, because they do change their stance, right? It was at first, don't wear masks. Then it is, yeah, wear masks to protect other people. But now they just came out and said, yeah, wearing a mask does protect you as well. So people look at that and they say, oh, I can't trust the CDC. So, I'm going to look to my politician to tell me what I need to do. That's not, yeah, Facebook is a good source of health information. Yeah. And it's kind of sad. But just realize that security is still very important. I know that, in the past, I've read that the OCR, when they go around and find institutions, they say that it's not because they don't have security in place. It's just that they don't know what's not secure within their organization. And so we're going to talk about in a little bit. We're going to talk about some solutions that are coming into the market where it can help institutions get their security shored up, if you will.
Okay, and yeah, so as we move forward, I think everyone that's listening will understand the different things that they can do today. Yep. There was recently an IDG and CSO magazine survey in April of 2020 that talked about how things are changing and how people are looking at risk differently. An overwhelming majority said that they are really evaluating the way they look at risks for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Having a risk management program within your organization is absolutely required by HIPAA. So what does that mean, right? Really what you should have is a mechanism for anybody to report a risk. So if somebody sees something, hey, that doesn't seem right. And I'll give you a prime example. Say someone wants to bring in an application to do something within the finance department, but it can't be patched with your standard operating procedure. That's a risk, right? So that needs to be entered into your risk management program as a risk, because now you have something that's going to be a one-off. You can't have your patching team do what they normally do. They have to address this one-off. And if they forget to do it, well, then that system goes unpatched. So that's a risk. And you have to put a expiration on that risk, right? Because after a year's time, your risk appetite will change a little bit, right? And so when you go back and review that after a year, you're like, yeah, what the heck were we thinking with this application? Let's get that out of here, because there's a better solution that we can patch with our standard operating procedure, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. And so it's important that risk is managed, and it's monitored, and it's addressed as you move forward. And things that are entered into your risk profile, they need to have expiration, so they keep popping up. You say, hey, are we still okay with this? And I'll give you a prime example. When I worked at a company that relied heavily upon communication services from AT&T, we found a vendor that we could save almost 50% with going with them for different circuits that we needed to connect locations. And so we entered a risk to say, hey, this is not our standard, like we did everything with AT&T before, but we're going with a cheaper option. So we need to, analyze this as time goes on to see if it's working. After a year, that risk popped back up, and we looked at it, and we found, yeah, you know what? We have 10 times as many outages with this cheaper company than we do with AT&T, and is that worth it? So now we have something that we can put cost to, and the decision was made, yeah, it's not worth the savings. We're actually losing more money from those outages. So we were able to solidify that section of the business by going back to AT&T. Simple example of how risk can help you become better as time goes on.
And it sounds like to me that the most important thing for you in that example, and for everyone, is identifying risk and then addressing it versus avoiding it is critical, because most people they oh God, I got to deal with this, versus this is something you really need to deal with.
And sometimes the risk is going to be, you're going to look at it and say, well, the cost to remediate that is so great, and the actual chance that this will lead to something bad is very low. So those kind of things, you just say, okay, we'll accept that risk, and if something bad happens, we'll deal with it at the time. But other things, you can pass that risk off to an insurance policy. If we're talking like cyber risk, you can install applications, increase security, patch things that provide risk, and really, you report all these risks up to management, and if you can attach a cost to each one of those risks. Yeah. So if this happens, you'll have a major outage to your primary application that's revenue generating, and for every hour you're down, it's going to cost you $1 million if you don't patch this thing. And they'll be like, oh, well, now I have $1 attached to that item. So yes, let's go ahead and remediate that risk, because I certainly don't want to go down and lose $1 million an hour. So those kind of things are helpful.
if you're not careful on the front end, you obviously pay on the back end, and
Yes.
that's the case with a lot of things. And thinking about how quickly we moved to remote work, and historically, especially healthcare systems haven't had to support this kind of distributed workforce. What has been some of the impacts?
Well, like I said earlier, anytime that you rush to implement something, you're going to have misconfigurations. And so it's important to circle back around with your security team, look at other options. If you're using a particular VPN solution or connection solution into the home office, again, you also need to think about, what happens to your data, right? Do you have some sort of data loss prevention program? Because where it used to be when we were all working in the office, it was easy to secure that data on, a file server, putting access in, on that particular drive. But now that people are distributed, are they pulling those files down at home? Are they keeping them on their laptops? What sort of encryption is on that file? If they're printing things out at home, what are they doing with those documents? Because now we have what could be a major breach if they're printing out things that have PHI on them, obviously. So it's really important to examine what we obviously when the crash comes, all hands are on deck. We work to get a solution, but it's important to circle back around, look at the security of that solution, make sure it's viable. And now that it's been 6 months, we should be looking at, how are we going to manage this long term, right? So that's what I would suggest is, have a plan, either to bring people back into the office or, continue having the distributed workforce.
Makes sense. So now let's transition a little bit. Let's talk about some of the root causes of data breach and how our view of them is beginning to change a bit. Security companies in the past have often focused on intentional cyber risk. We know it's a big portion, about half the attacks, but Armor and other companies are starting to incorporate technology that really looks at ways to address other kinds of risks.
Certainly. There are really two major types of cyber risk, and it is split down the middle. I think intentional cyber risk, which is your traditional hackers and people that mean to do harm to your business, is right around 51% of breaches that we're seeing, and then 49% of that is the unintentional cyber risk. That's the configuration errors, user error, just things that maybe you cannot put a technical tool on to monitor. It's more of a human
opening
type of thing.
Opening an email that you shouldn't, but you do it anyway.
Truly. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, sometimes we run phishing campaigns here at the office just to make sure that people are have that security mind frame that we tried to instill in our folks. And yeah, that I got an email from my manager that said, "Hey, layoffs are coming, and here's the list of people that are at risk." And I was like, "Holy cow!"
That's important.
It is important. I double clicked on it, and it said, "You have just been the victim of a phishing email." And so I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it! I'm in compliance," and I clicked on that email. But yes, so and that brings up a good point that you should have a robust security awareness program. And it should be something that you're not just checking a box for a compliance requirement. It really is something that you need to create within your culture, a culture of security and compliance. Because if you have that healthy skepticism, and you look at stuff and go, well, why is Bob sending me this email? He's right there. Why didn't he just come and talk to me, right? And you should have that skepticism, right? You should look, well, this doesn't seem right. And if it doesn't seem right, raise your hand. Don't be, I don't want to be the one that's, I'll look stupid if it's nothing, that's not true. You need to raise your hand. And you know what? The security team is going to appreciate that, because security and compliance is not just on the security team and not just on, GRC team. It's really everybody's responsibility to make sure that that organization is secure and compliant. So absolutely.
Well, and right now in healthcare, officials and IT professionals are exhausted from the work that they're doing, just trying to control the pandemic, as well as dealing with the new challenges that remote work is presenting. So there's even more of a chance for accidental kinds of risk such as misconfigurations or leaked credentials.
Absolutely. I'm sure people in the audience have heard the term shadow IT. You know, what is that? Well, with the advent of public cloud, it is really easy for anybody to spin up a server to do some work, you know. So what you find is now your marketing teams, your sales teams, your finance teams, they are going out to AWS, you know, opening an account and spinning up machines and connecting them to the network. And so that creates a lot of, you know, misconfiguration errors that is a problem, because typically when you go through the IT team, they will provision these assets, make sure that they're secure, they're patched, and what have you. But when other organizations are doing that outside of IT, that creates a tremendous amount of risk. And so, you know, that brings in a whole lot of the unintentional cyber risk to your organization. So it's important that you have something that addresses that.
Intentional risk. We've been talking about this. Cyber criminals are technologically advanced and incredibly persistent. They also have one of the biggest motivators a human can have, and that's financially. Remote desktop protocol, Microsoft's primary tool for remote access, has been around for a while and has recently been evolving. Many of the attacks that we see from these intentional threat actors are remote code execution.
Yes, that's correct. And as we talk about the increased data risk, we're collecting more data now than ever. I know GDPR puts restrictions on what they can do in the EU as far as collecting data, but in the United States, companies can collect whatever they can get their hands on. And when you think about your own personal use, right? Storage is so cheap that we never delete anything anymore. When we run out of space on a drive, we just add a new drive and we move storage over to the new drive rather than going back and cleaning up a drive to, you know, create some space for whatever your needs are. And when I think about my own personal usage, I have a NAS device here at home that has two 1 terabyte drives that are mirrored. So I don't, you know, so I have some redundancy, so I've got fault tolerance there. But you know, when I think about it, I take pictures and video because with cell phones and digital technology, there are no more consumables, right? It used to be that you were very careful about the picture you took because you only had 36 pictures on that roll of film, right?
And it was
Not
expensive
anymore.
to develop the film, yes.
Now we just take pictures, we put it on speed, and what do we do with those pictures? We put them on our drive, and we probably never look at them again. And so when I think about my own personal use, I never delete files, right? I just go and get more storage. And I think that is part of the problem, right? So we're collecting more data than ever before. We're not managing that data, and that creates more cyber risk, right? Because when you think about companies collecting personal data, really, you want to make sure that you have a purpose for the data that you collect. Because when if a breach happens, it becomes that much more devastating when you've got tons of data that you really don't have any use for. So be thoughtful about the data you collect. Make sure you have a purpose for it. And eventually, when we get some sort of comprehensive legislation on a national level, I know that, you know, companies are dealing with CCPA. I know Washington State has privacy legislation, so does Nevada, and there's other, Illinois, I think, is one. So they're popping up all over the place, and you're going to have to start examining the data you collect. So why not start now? Make sure that you understand what you're collecting, how you're collecting it, and where it's being stored. And you know, you're going to also have to be custodians of that data so that when someone says, hey, what do you got on me? You're going to be able to show them this is what we got, and this is who we've given it to. So start now.
Well, then that makes sense, and I appreciate you adding to my to-do list because I've got a bunch of pictures that I probably don't need anymore, and I should get rid of those.
Yeah.
It sounds like you do too, so I shouldn't feel too bad.
Yeah, just buy more storage. It's easy.
Well, you know, I think one thing interesting to hear in terms of data integrity is that more people are connecting to VPNs. And sometimes, obviously, they find it a little bit problematic, so they may be just downloading large files to their desktop. And, you know, how are they really maintaining the integrity of the backup systems is in question.
So yeah, it is a problem. And if you have a file that multiple people are sharing, you need some solution like SharePoint or um, an application that allow multiple people to access a file and make changes, so they don't really need to download it to their desktop. But yes, I spoke about this earlier a little bit, talking about data loss prevention. How are you managing those files that are now going out to those endpoints at other locations? And it's important to circle back and think about how you're going to secure those files. And are you going to allow folks to print at home? And because once you do that, you now have no technical control over that data. It's now a document sitting on a desk somewhere. So you might need to make sure those people that have the need to print at home also have a shredder, so that stuff can go straight into the basket when they're done with it. But yeah, it's just important that you always have that security mind frame, and that you're going back and examining the things that you've already instituted. And if you're going to have this remote workforce going forward, how are you going to manage these things?
It's one of the first jobs, having worked remote for many years, one of the first jobs I had that I worked remote. My mentor said to me, he goes, one of the most important things you can have in your office is a shredder. I mean, and knowing when to use it, it sounds like that's very similar to making sure that you know when to delete files.
Yep. And if you are, excuse me, if you are high trust compliant, they have a requirement that you have a clear desk policy, right? So that someone's going around and looking at the desk to make sure that there's no PHI sitting on somebody's desk, that it's being secured or otherwise shredded with secure shredding bins around the building. So yeah, it's important.
So let's talk a little bit about this new distributed reality that we're in. We know that most organizations are now some sort of combination of on-premise forms of a SaaS solution, and then they're hosting a lot of their critical applications in either a public or private cloud.
Yeah, this is the evolution of technology, and we're in the midst of the migration right now. So on this slide here, you can see on the far left we have the on-premise or private cloud or hybrid cloud situation where companies are still within their own data center, still hosting their own applications, and taking on all the cost of what it takes to manage those applications, what it takes to heat and cool a data center or have physical and environmental controls. We've seen in the past few years the migration to software as a service through different applications that are critical to running your business. Office 365 for email and Office Suite. You've got ServiceNow to do your ticketing, your incident management, your problem management, that sort of things. Also, your development is within that application. Salesforce, cloud storage such as Box, and then of course the Adobe suite as well. And then we're also seeing migrations to the public cloud now and away from data centers. When I was an auditor, I had a client that the first year I did their audit, they had around 350 clients in their data center, and the following year they were down to around 200. So I mean, that's a real drop in their number of clients, and that's because we were seeing the migration to the cloud. And so it's easy now to host an application, to spin up a server when you need added capacity for running your business. And there's plenty of fantastic tools in public cloud that allow you to orchestrate and automate these sort of things.
In terms of some of the best practices for mitigating this risk, what do you suggest?
So obviously there's plenty that you can do to mitigate cyber risk. Some of the best practices are and number one is a no-brainer, is to segment your network. And the reason that this is so important, I like to describe security to folks as an onion, right? You cut an onion, you see all the concentric circles. Well, the center of that onion would be the data that you're collecting, right? And so what are you doing to secure that data? Is it encrypted? Is it password protected? And then if you go out a layer, now we're talking about the database where that application pulls that data from. So how are you securing the database? And then outside that, I just talked about the application. How are you securing the application? How are you securing the server that it runs on? How are you securing the network that that server sits on? And the data center, how are you securing that network at the data center? So it's just one big onion. So as we segment the network, it creates hurdles for someone that means to do your company harm. First of all, they have to get in somehow. They have to breach the perimeter, right? And so now they have to gain access to the network. And if everything has security around it as you go through, it's going to be very difficult for them to get to any sort of data. And so that's where segment the network comes from. You're not going to put that sensitive data on the same network with your email server. That doesn't make sense. So those kind of things have to be in place. Identity and access management. Are you making sure that you have a program to onboard people, to offboard people, that when people within your company change jobs, their access should absolutely change based on that function? And that leads me into number 3, least privilege access. Your CEO doesn't have to have access to that critical data unless he's doing IT for a small company. So each person should have their role, and to that role should be attached what access is required for that job function. Context awareness, knowing what your infrastructure is, knowing how distributed you are, where are your endpoints and outpoints of the network, and knowing what your infrastructure is. And then visibility and analytics. Do you have something within your company that is showing you, where you are with regards to security? Do you have some sort, and there's this new tool out, and it's very popular now, especially if you're in the cloud, called Cloud Security Posture Management. And what this does is you can say, I want to be HIPAA compliant. And so it creates a security profile for HIPAA, and then you apply that to all your instances. And what it does is it creates a report and says, here are all the things that you need to change. Now, obviously, it's not going to make you HIPAA compliant, because we know that compliance is mainly people, process, and technology, but it can certainly alleviate some of the unknowns within your technology, right? So it'll give you a laundry list of things that you need to remediate to bring those things in line with what HIPAA requirements are. And then the neat thing is, anytime someone spins something up, we talked about shadow IT. If somebody spins something up, it immediately will alert upon that new instance and say, hey, this is outside of our security profile. What do you want me to do? Some of the tools will auto remediate, bring it in line with everything else, right? And then it'll monitor all those instances. Anything, configuration change, you put a new application on one and it bumps something out of track with that security posture, it'll alert you on that, or auto remediate to bring it back in line with everything else. So it's very cool, and something that I'm excited to see, because like I said earlier, the OCR was finding people a couple of years ago for things they didn't know. Well, now we have a tool that can certainly bring those technology things to the forefront and pop them up, so you can say, oh, hey, I have all these S3 buckets running, unsecured in the wild. Well, that's not good. So let's go ahead and put some security on those S3 buckets. So visibility and analytics are very important going forward.
They are for everybody these days. So there's no question that understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it is something that you need to be aware of day in and day out. For me, I am a big process person. I believe that once something happens, documenting it because it may happen again is important. And right now we're at a time that's unprecedented. And I think in terms of the creating crisis communications, and who is creating policies and plans should have a real opportunity to document those, because hopefully we won't, but we may need them again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so process, like I said, process, people, technology, those are the things that you need to be concerned of when it comes to security. Make sure that you have your policies, make sure they cover the things that you need to have them cover. Make sure that you have controls around your people, right? How are you bringing people in? How are you vetting candidates for jobs, right? Do you have specific job descriptions for all those people that are employed at your organization? And then, of course, the technology, making sure that things are patched. With ransomware, what do you have in place for your business continuity plan? Was that was that built prior to the applications, or was it something that you tried to patch together after the applications came in, right? Ideally, when an application comes to your organization, the infrastructure should be built to sustain what the business requires around the business continuity plan, right? So if they have this critical application and then say, our RTO and RPO, our RPO can only be 1 hour, but our RTO can be, we can be down for 4 hours, but we need to have that restore point at 1 hour so we're not losing any data. So that information is required to build the infrastructure, right? And the lower the numbers on the RTO, RPO, will be more expensive for your infrastructure, right? Because now you're talking about highly available data centers, maybe multiple data centers with highly available, right? So you got a load balancer that's sending things either way, and if one goes down, you're still serving customers over here. So yeah, these are all things that need to be discussed, and something that is important when you're thinking about creating a culture of compliance and a culture of security.
Yeah, and when we're speaking of best practices, and just focusing on SaaS providers for the moment, the ones that are primarily based in the cloud, what are some of your suggestions?
Well, obviously, multi-factor authentication is a big one, right? Because as we are becoming more distributed, you want to make sure that the people that are connecting into your business are the people that are the ones that have access, right? It's much easier to control when you're in the office, right? But now that we have people working remotely, it's important that we use multi-factor authentication just from a security standpoint. Make sure that you have dedicated administrator accounts. And what I mean by that is if I'm an administrator and I have godlike access to the network, that I'm not using that for every day when I'm sitting at my desk, doing my email. I should have a personal account that I log into for non-admin activities. And then when I need to go and reboot a server or what have you, I use my admin credentials to get to that server. And it can be as easy as, like if my ID is first initial last name, so Annand for my everyday account, and then for my admin account, it could be admin-Annand, but just something like that, so that you have a unique ID for everyday work and a unique ID for administrator accounts. Then, of course, user education and a policy around security awareness. This is something that really pays dividends, because educating your workforce on the different threats that are out there and having security in the forefront of their mind as they're doing their daily job functions is tremendously important. It just takes the one wrong click to bring an organization down. So you get the biggest bang for your buck with a security awareness program, because there are tons of things out on the internet that you can just say, hey, everybody, go look at this video, and make sure that people are digesting that information and taking it in. And you can have, run a campaign where you send out phishing emails to see who's maybe not on board with the whole security mind frame. So very big bang for your buck on a security awareness program. And it should be something that you're not just doing in January to meet your compliance requirement for the year. It should be something that you're doing campaigns throughout the year, just to keep it. And it can be as simple as a poster on the wall, right? Just maybe a graphic about, phishing emails and what you should be responsible for. Then you have to have an administrator recovery plan. And this is very important, because you should not only have a business continuity plan and incident response plan, but you should be testing those plans, right? The last thing you want to do is be in the midst of an outage or a breach and not know who to contact, or not know who to gather into a room to address the security situation, or not know how to bring the system back up because you haven't exercised that BCP or you haven't exercised your IRP. And it doesn't mean that you have to shut down a data center, which is funny. I have a story about that. You don't have to shut down a data center to test your BCP. When I worked for a major retailer, we have a gigantic data center, right? And every data center has one of those emergency shut-off switch, because it's required by insurance, right? So we wanted to make sure nobody ever touched it. So we had a case around, a plastic case, and there was an alarm on that case, right? Somebody opened the case, the alarm would go off. Well, someone had opened the case, the alarm was going off, and the security guard thought that, oh my gosh, I need to shut everything down. Boom! So we found out that we didn't have the necessary BCPs, right? We had tons of applications. We did not know what things needed to be brought up first. We did not know the order, which databases had to be brought online before which applications were launched, and it was a disaster. And so it was a good lesson, though, right? So everybody had to create their own BCP, and then we did the same. We didn't do it, hit the emergency shut-off switch, but we had each application go through an exercise where we shut it down, made sure that everyone was on board with how to start it up properly and get it back online. So very important that people exercise those plans. And then last one is critical. You need to have a vendor management program, and it's not just creating a list of your vendors. I mean, that's important, yes, but you should be asking for their, if they're having, certainly if they have access to your critical data, you should have a business associate agreement with them. But you should also see their SOC 2 reports. If they're high trust certified, you should see that report as well. That's not enough either. You need to validate that they are actually doing the things that they say they're doing in those reports. If you look at the SOC 2 and it says that they have a three-legged monkey juggling bananas in the data center, you better see a three-legged monkey in the data center juggling bananas. I mean, it's that simple. So
who doesn't like three-legged monkeys juggling bananas?
It's true. But think about the Quest Diagnostic breach that happened a couple of years ago. That was due to a third party. That third party is no longer in business. And so Quest was very fortunate that they could point the finger at somebody else, but that could have been an entity leveling event for them as well. Security breaches are very expensive, and you don't want to find yourself on the wrong end of that. So if you are sharing data with a third party, you better make sure that it's secure and they treat it with the same respect that you do. So I've preached enough.
All right. Yes. Well, and I think the number 5 there is an important one that I want to hit on a little bit more. Is the SaaS providers will often train their employees, but I think that they need to spend a little bit more time training the end users of their services as well.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. It's critical that people understand the technology that they're bringing into the business. So if you don't have anybody that's up to speed on those SaaS applications, I recommend maybe putting somebody in training, to understand the security of it, or maybe hiring a new person that has some experience securing those SaaS applications.
Those are some great points. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the security and cybersecurity essentials. The ones you see listed here, in your mind, what are the most important?
Well, the correct answer is they're all important. Certainly your vulnerability threat management program is essential to making sure that you have at least a foundational security platform, right? So the Equifax breach, that was Apache struts that weren't patched, and they were unpatched for 6 months. So patching things when security vulnerabilities come out, when they're identified to you, be quick about it. You should have a team of people that are addressing this on a regular basis. They do the heavy lifting, and it's a thankless job because it never ends, right? As soon as you're done, with some major patches, a whole new list comes out the next month. So really, thank your people that do patching, because it's a hard job. I know I've done it. So next one, incident response and business continuity plans. I talked a little bit about that already. You should have these in place. They should be, your policies and processes should be examined every year, because needs change within the organizations, as do people. So examine those processes and policies annually to make sure they're still valid, but also exercise them. Make sure you're practicing what you're going to do with an incident if it happens. Get the right people in a room and say, okay, we just been hacked and our data has been breached. And have a scenario. Someone makes up a scenario and you go around the table and you know, who contacts customers to let them know that their data's been breached? What are you going to say to the press? Are you going to say anything to the press? Do you have to get the police involved? You know, these things you need to discuss and know what's going to happen before it actually happens, because you don't want to find yourself in that situation where, oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? Same thing with backup and restore plans. I worked for a company where we would take all our critical applications and we would move them to their DR environment for a month to make sure, number one, we knew the process to move that application to the DR environment, but also to let it run there a month to make sure the capacity at the DR environment was suitable for day-to-day traffic, right? So very important that you're doing that. Security awareness, I talked about that quite a bit today. It's very, very impactful and easy way to create that security and compliance mindset at your workplace. Create that culture, make sure that people are having that healthy skepticism in their head. Compliance, make sure that people understand that compliance is not a byproduct of security. It lives and breathes by itself, because yes, security protects our technology, but compliance is the measure of that security. It's the measure of your people process. It's the measure of all the things that go on within the business. So make sure that you are have a compliance mind frame. Make sure that people are working towards compliance on a day-to-day basis, because GRC can't do it. Really, GRC team, we just collect the evidence and present that to the auditor. Really, the day-to-day work that's being done, making sure that, you know, if there's a log to be checked on a daily basis, that log is being checked. If there is a process for implementing new applications, that process is being followed, and that there's evidence to follow it, right? And then the transference of risk. So when you're evaluating your risk, you know, how do you either mitigate that risk or move it to somebody else, right? And the best way to do that is through cybersecurity insurance, right? So transfer the risk either to a non-risk by mitigating that risk, or minimize the risk by having a security insurance policy.
It appears, as I look at this list, it appears a lot of the things that healthcare organizations are doing to ensure clinical levels being where they're at, they need to apply some of those to their IT as well, because again, there's a lot of things I see here that making sure the right order sets and things like that. So it's really not something they're not aware of. It's just something that they need to transition to a different area of their business.
Absolutely, yeah.
But for some of those healthcare organizations, what are some questions they should be asking themselves right now?
So we just happen to have a slide with these questions. So like it says in security, no news is often bad news. You should have reports, metrics, and data on pretty much everything you're doing. This is very helpful in knowing, whether things are operating correctly, right? It can be performance metrics. But from a security standpoint, it can be anomalies that should not be happening, right? If you're seeing something strange within the log files, if this thing happens and then this thing immediately follows it, that could be an indication of a breach. So all the logging in the world is useless if somebody isn't monitoring it, right? And if you're not going through it and creating metrics and reporting on it, right? So ask yourself, what are the top security risks within your organization? Is it the fact that you now have a distributed workforce? Do you have an effective security awareness program? I keep stressing this. It really does pay dividends. What are you going to do if there's a breach, say ransomware attack? What is the response plan? Who do I contact? Number one, people should know who to call to kick off an incident response plan. And that's not somebody that necessarily would be in security. It's somebody who sees something, that doesn't seem right, right? And then when did you last test those recovery and response procedures? Those are very important. I think I've stressed that throughout this presentation today. You got to test those. You got to have the policy, first of all, and you have to have the procedures, but you got to test them so that you know what to do in advance.
So let's say hypothetically somebody has ignored everything you've just said and tried to educate them, and they are breached. What is some of the typical best practices that they should follow in dealing with that?
And so this slide is really spelling it out for you. So first, get everybody involved, right? Get the right people in the room, people, and not just people who understand, but people who can make decisions, right? You need to have, people that can act and act quickly and make decisive decisions, because time is against you on this, right? We talk about this thing called dwell time, right? And to define dwell time is the time that your system is breached to the time that you understand that your system is breached and how it was breached, right? And during that time, data is being exfiltrated, identity may have been compromised, they may have access to other things within your organization. So engage quickly, try to identify where the gap is, where the hole is, how did they breach your network, and shut it down quickly. And you have to have multiple people in there to make decisions quickly. The next one is do not negotiate with people that are threatening your organization. And the reason we recommend this is a lot of times, if you look at what's happening with ransomware, even when people pay the ransom, they're not always getting their data back. And typically they come back and they encrypt you again. Even if, a lot of times they don't even have the decryption key. So they can't unencrypt your data. So you've just given them money for nothing. Really what you should be doing is protecting yourself, right? Make sure that you have offline backups so that you can restore the data, exercise your BCP so you can, restore service, and you may be down for a day or two while you're doing this. But system by system, you should be able to restore those things and restore that data. So, and it's very important that you have a copy of your backups offline so that those can't be encrypted. The next thing is do no harm. Make sure, and I think that goes without saying, you're not going to start ripping things out, stop the breach, right? So make sure you're doing things thoughtfully, and that really comes from the engagement in the first box there, right? So have the right decision makers in there, make sure that you're doing the right things, and you're not doing something that's going to make your system unrecoverable. And the next thing is follow through, right? You got to make sure those holes are patched, that you have some sort of monitoring on those systems that were breached, so that the next time, and there will be a next time, because hackers are notorious for coming back to, especially if they're paid a ransom, they will come back a second time because this is now a source of income for them. So make sure you follow through and patch those holes.
In wrapping up and talking about some of the key takeaways from your presentation, we know that there's a lot of risk that's not intentional that we bring upon ourselves, but we need to be diligent as we are more exhausted from these changes due to the pandemic. We know that COVID-19 has forced some long-term adaptation that many IT professionals are saying is really going to impact how they approach their business and communications for years to come. We know in terms of handling that health information, that keeping that confidentiality and integrity availability is a continuing challenge as we're a distributed workforce. We know that telemedicine is exploding, and with over 1 billion different telemedicine visits scheduled to be anticipated this year. And finally, cybersecurity, just like we're trying to attack the virus, is really a community effort.
Absolutely. Number 5 is the big one for me. Really, a breach can happen anywhere within the company. It can be, the secretary in, the front reception area clicking on an email that shouldn't be clicked on, or it can be an unpatched system, in the cloud. It can come from multiple areas, right? So really, if everybody works together, and I've said this multiple times today, if you have that mindset, that security mindset, and that culture of compliance, it will pay dividends, because as an organization, you'll be that much more secure. And there have been studies that said if security and compliance is important to the executive level, it just makes the company much more secure and compliant, just because that filters down. And so I would stress any of the leaders that are out there, try to make cybersecurity and compliance part of your culture. And you do that through security awareness. You do that through town halls, talking about security and compliance, and making sure that you reward the people that are doing the right things, right?
That makes sense. You know, instead of punishing the people that do bad, give some rewards to the people that do good, and the people that aren't maybe doing the right things will notice and maybe
Yep.
get on board. So,
I mean, there's certainly
well,
teaching moments when someone's not doing the right thing, but yeah, I agree with you 100%. Let's do some positive reinforcement, because that makes everybody want to be a part of it.
no, I agree. It's again, it needs to be something that's rewarded when you're doing the right thing as it comes to this. So, well, Mike, I really appreciate your time. I know that I learned a lot about cybersecurity and some of the risks, and as I said, I've got some file deletions that I need to do myself. So I thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you sharing some of your knowledge with us around this particular topic.
Absolutely, Joe. It's been a pleasure to be with you today and talk about these things. I want to just say to the audience real quick, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at mike.annand@armor.com. I'd be happy to either talk with you or send you an email with a response to your questions. And if I don't have the answer, I can certainly find it for you. So thank you very much.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for your time, and everybody have a great day.